play hardball with them? Are you going to mention COVID?
Well, I'm not gonna say, no, I'm not gonna mention COVID. I'm not gonna say, oh, I'm gonna play hardball with China. I'm gonna play hardball with you, President Xi. No, no. We're gonna be very nice. They're gonna be very nice. And we'll see what happens. But ultimately, they have to make a deal because otherwise, they're not gonna be able to deal in the United States.
The tariff rates as high as they are now is effectively an embargo of trade between the United States and China. Do you see that?
That's true. 145% is very high, and it won't be that high. It's not going to be that high. It got up to there. We were talking about fentanyl, where various elements built it up to 145. No, it won't be anywhere near that high.
What do you think it'll come down to if you have
It'll come down substantially, but it won't be zero. It used to be zero. We were just destroyed. China was taking us for a ride, and just not going to have. It's not going to happen. We're going to be very good to China. Have a great relationship with President Xi, but they would make billions and billions and billions of dollars a year, and they would build their military out of the United States and what they made. So that won't happen. But they're going to do very well, and I think they're going to be happy. And I think we're going to live together very happily and ideally work together. So I think it's going to work out very well. But
Well. Today is extremely interesting. What's going on, everybody? It's Professor Zeus, and I'm back with another video. If this is your first time at the channel, just know I greatly appreciate you for stopping by. Go ahead and hit subscribe. It's like everybody be watching these videos, but nobody's subscribing. I need you guys to help me subscribe and get to 2,000 subscribers. Guys, interesting news just came out from our good old President Donald Trump. He had some surprising statements about, the tariff policies and, the escalating trade war with China. And as you guys do know, I try to keep you guys updated with what's going on geopolitically, from how some of our businesses are reacting, how our politics are, and politicians are reacting to all these different things. So this is just the newest insight. And, a lot of people are saying to President Trump's statements is that, he's caving. Other people think it's, a strategic pivot, art of the deal and all that good stuff. But, today we're going to look at what he said, what it means, and whether this marks a real shift in his stance. Again, we'll look at things from all angles. We'll be critical, we'll be fair, and we'll be objective. So, just to give you guys, again, a quick background, quick recap, right? When President Trump got reelected, right, he pushed aggressively for, tariff policies, especially targeting China for various different reasons. And, he, at some point, it went from 20, 30, 40 up to 145, and now it's at 245. And here he's saying, it's as high as 145 on, Chinese goods, letting the issues be, the trade deficit, the issue with smuggling fentanyl, and, overall national security. And obviously, all of these moves have escalated the trade war with China, right? With retaliatory tariffs coming from China with 125% on our U.S. goods, and then restricting China from giving us rare earth minerals that can help our good old boy Elon Musk to help him build his batteries for his Teslas. And I don't know if you guys saw it. I talked about it yesterday. Tesla had an earnings call yesterday, and they are down 71%. So we're not going to hear that much from Elon, just as we used to, basically. And, this has a lot of impact, right? Especially global markets have been tanking. With the S&P 500 dropping, 15% from its peak, and obviously there's been more and more discussions of a recession. And these tariffs on China, I mean, the tariffs weren't just for China, right? He slapped 25% tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and a 10% baseline tariff on most other countries. And he framed it in a way where it's to protect American workers and then rebuild manufacturing, to bring manufacturing and production back to America. But like, as I always say, 80% of Americans want these production and manufacturing jobs to come back to America, but not even 20% out of that 80% are willing to swap their desk jobs to go work in the coal mines or go work in the factories, right? But the blowback was extremely intense because you got higher consumer prices, you got a lot of supply chain chaos, and retaliatory tariffs coming from trading partners like the European Union and Canada. So obviously this strategy was bold, but it came with a lot of risk, and a lot of economists warned of a global trade war, right? And a lot of people said the US, us, will be hit the hardest. Now, after all that recap, let's talk about what we just watched and what this really means. So posts on Twitter and different things like that have been replaying this type of clip saying, where President Trump is saying, I can't imagine a further increase on tariffs on China. He's expressing hopes to talk with Chinese President Xi Jinping and calling him a friend. And then we have President Trump's trade advisor like Peter Navarro saying 90 days, we're going to have 90 deals in 90 days. And it's like since he said that, we haven't heard of one deal. It's just really interesting, if you ask me. And these kind of statements, these kind of remarks really come right after a volatile 2 weeks, right? Where President Trump had paused reciprocal tariffs on most countries for the 90 days. 90 days, 90 deals again, but we haven't heard not one deal, right? And then we heard from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. He hinted that there's going to be a lot of de-escalation between U.S. and China. I believe he was at a J.P. Morgan summit, and he, reportedly said that the U.S.-China trade war, their current tariff levels are, unsustainable, even though there haven't been any formal negotiations have been started. There's been none, right? So markets kind of bounced back off that type of news, with the NASDAQ jumping 4.2%. President Trump also exempted electronics like smartphones and laptops from that 125% that was original. And, a lot of people saw that as one of the first moves, as like he's really trying to dial it back and help the consumers and tech companies. But again, these statements, these remarks are a shift from President Trump's earlier rhetoric, where he called tariffs a national emergency and dismissed and really didn't care about market turmoil. If you saw countless times how reporters will come to the Oval Office and ask him about the market, he said, "Oh, I didn't see the market. I don't know what's going on," right? So is he caving, or is something else going on? Let's try to break it down. So a lot of critics are right now arguing that President Trump backtracking shows he's buckling under pressure, right? These tariffs have a lot of fallout, right? You got layoffs, you have price hikes, you have 50% stock market drops. All of these things are getting hit hard, right? And an opinion in the New York Times called this approach amateurish, right? Saying he misjudged China's willingness to retaliate. And again, I've talked about, the Chinese business analyst, what's his name, Victor Gao. He's a huge, big deal in China. He came about and was saying, China was here 5,000 years ago, and China's going to be here for another 5,000 years. So China wasn't really budging when it came to all these things that were going on, right? And China's economy also is less dependent on U.S. exports than it was in 2018, which means China has a little bit more leverage on us than we do on them. Plus, President Trump's job approval rating, it dipped after the tariff rollout, meaning that there's a lot of backlash based on these choices, right? And on the other side, a lot of people who are pro-President Trump insist that everything he does is tactical and everything that he does is 4D chess, right? Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he's saying that it's unsustainable, suggesting that they're open to deals. We've seen Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt saying that, the ball is in China's court. They need to make a deal with us, especially with over 75 countries reportedly negotiating trade agreements. But again, 90 days, 90 deals. We haven't seen one deal. And then exempting electronics, right, was a nod to consumers and companies like Apple, right? We heard that Apple, Tim Cook and everybody, they went to China, filled up planes with iPhones so they wouldn't get hit with the tariffs. Because literally, with those tariffs hit, iPhones will just be unaffordable. They're damn near already unaffordable, right? And a lot of people are seeing this as, market manipulation, causing chaos deliberately to, keep trading partners off balance. But it's a really risky move because it alienates a lot of our allies. And it's not, some people just don't really know, right? No matter what angle, one thing is clear. President Trump's statements have obviously sparked a huge debate. Is he softening to save the economy? Or is he repositioning us for better deals? Or is he just improvising on the fly? Honestly, it might be a mix of all three, right? So what's next, right? The 90-day tariff pause for most countries ends this July. And President Trump can impose higher tariffs if all these conversations stall. Again, 90 days, 90 deals, but we haven't seen anyone yet. With China, the lack of direct talks with President Xi, it's a hurdle, it's an obstacle. Beijing is demanding respect before negotiating. For consumers, tariffs just mean higher prices, right? Again, however much you pay for an iPhone now, imagine if your iPhone that you're holding in your hand right now costs $2,300. Can you imagine paying $2,300 for an iPhone right now in today's economy, right? And price your groceries, right? For businesses, it's supply chain uncertainty. I've already given you guys case studies on NVIDIA and Tesla. NVIDIA, they came out with the H20 processor chip, right, to meet a certain protocol and guideline for them to export to China. Jensen Huang is over there going to Mar-a-Lago, speaking to President Trump, trying to lobby to make sure that they still have ways to sell to China. But then before you know it, Jensen Huang is going to China himself to see what he can do, because it turns out that now, we're looking into how NVIDIA is making their sales. And, essentially, they were worried that they would be having to pay $5.5 billion every quarter based on their sales, right? And then Tesla has a huge market in China, and they're heavily impacted with the tariffs, right? And then how, Elon has positioned himself within the government, Doge, and all these types of things. He's been severely affected on the political side and his business. So he doesn't even really know what he wants to do, right? So, a lot of this matters because trade wars affect everyone. It affects your wallet, it affects your job, and it affects the global economy. Whether President Trump is, caving or conceding, or he's pivoting and repositioning, his next moves are going to shape 2025 and beyond, right? So that's our deep dive today with President Trump's tariff twister. Let me know what you guys think. Is he backing down, or is he playing a bigger game? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Hit that like button, hit that bell notification so you always get notified when I drop a new video, and send this video to someone who might see some value in it. And never ever forget, it's you and I verse: information, application, execution. Until next time, peace.